Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and it's an enormous pleasure for me to be here, but also particularly to introduce Elizabeth Cairncross to you. Elizabeth is head of Wells Cathedral School. She studied English at Bedford College, London University, and taught at the King Edward School at Whitley, Kingston Grammar School, Christ Hospital, and now Wells Cathedral School. She's a trustee of the Buckley Evans charity. She was chair of the Girls' School Association in August 2011. She's a yeoman ironmonger, whatever that is, she is, a governor of Robert Geffrey School, and she was a trustee of Case Europe, which is where I got to know Elizabeth extremely well, because I was chair of Case Europe. So we were just talking about the number of places in Europe that we went to in our various travels over the years. And for those of us who've had the pleasure of knowing Elizabeth, will know that she is absolutely committed, not only to leadership of schools, but also to development, advancement, and fundraising. And also, she is the most fantastic fun. And only Elizabeth can come up with the title, Why School Leaders Screw Up Fundraising, and what we can do about it. Elizabeth, over to you.
Sir Eric, Your Royal Highnesses, Lords, Ladies and Gentlemen. Now, I don't know where they are either, but I have learnt from our current head of external relations at Wells Cathedral School that there might be some in the audience and you shouldn't offend them. And it really raises the tone. So, good morning, and thank you very much, Eric, for that introduction. And if you want to know about being in the back of a taxi with Eric in various European and indeed American cities, then come and ask me afterwards. Just one little quibble, Eric, I was never chair of the Girls' School Association, and those who know me really well in this room will know that that is unlikely to have happened. I was chair of the Choir Schools Association, so something about the glasses, Eric. It was a C and not a G. It is a huge, huge privilege to be here, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much indeed for asking me. Why and how do heads screw up development? And what can we do about it? Some of you, if you had your ears open as you came in, will have heard some music playing. You could be forgiven if you didn't actually recognize the piece of music, but I think you might have recognized the tune. Anybody like to venture it? Come on, louder. What was it? It's a tune we now know as... it's not Ode to Joy, but it's quite close. We're in the right geographic sort of area. It's Austria, which is now, of course, the German national anthem. Deutschland, Deutschland, über alles. And that version of it is a rather subtle arrangement in a little impromptu by Clara Schumann. And she called it the Hymn of Vienna, Hymn de Vienne. And she wrote it because she was really, really good at development. She'd done a concert tour in Vienna. Vienna had taken her to its heart, and she wanted to give Vienna a present before she left. And so she wrote that impromptu, which is a rather charming arrangement of what Vienna at the time regarded as its very own patriotic tune. And she gave it to the city of Vienna as a gift, and of course they loved her even more. It's actually, I am told by our head of piano at Wells Cathedral School, a very, very difficult piece. He said, as only a head of piano could, yes, it is said that she was a very capable pianist, Elizabeth. And therefore it is evidently deceptively easy sounding. It buries skill in simplicity. It was written to say thank you. It was written as a kind of piece of flattery. And it's very charming, and she knew that that tune was a bit of an earworm. In other words, that woman was a model for development because she knew all about using her music for all those qualities. Well, I'm a head. I've been the head of Wells Cathedral School for 16 years, and so I know all about screwing things up. Because, of course, I do it on a daily basis. You are employed in schools and in the philanthropy business, in the development business, in the advancement business, in education. And so you know all about how to do it properly. And you think it's important. So you spend a lot of time wondering why the leaders in your school and the governors in your school don't realize it's important. After all, they appointed you, didn't they? So why don't they realize that it's important? Now, many of you, I know, most of you, work with inspirational heads who never screw up development. And I am in awe of them. And you've got a lot of them presenting at this conference. So go and hear Patrick Derham, go and hear Keith Budge, go and hear Rachel Dent, go and hear Mike Buchanan, because they absolutely don't screw up development. But I have spent 16 years realizing that as the head of Wells Cathedral School, whose motto is Esto Quod Es, which means be what you are, I have to get up every day and think, how do I not mess up the next 1,000 years? Because Wells Cathedral School has existed since 909, contrary to some people's thinking. I haven't been there all that time. But if you're the head of a school that's been going that long, then 16 years is but a breath, and it doesn't half put everything in perspective. And yet, of course, development needs to be happening now, and you can't just sit around waiting for it. And when I started as a head, I really had no idea about development. I knew we needed it. I knew that I worked in a school where various people who tried to do it came and told me how difficult it was in our culture. Horrendous stories about giving back large checks because the school didn't know what to do. Just dreadful. But that in itself didn't really help me. We needed it, and I had to learn. And I learned, I suppose, about development from two significant and very capable professionals that we were fortunate to employ at Wells Cathedral School to help us do it. And because I met a chap called Eric Thomas through Case Europe, and was fortunate eventually to sit on the board of Case Europe for about 6 years. And Case Europe also knows about development and fundraising and about leaders who screw it up. The great cop-out for heads in Case is that so many of the leaders are vice-chancellors and not heads, and therefore it sort of deflects some of the flack off us. And Case Europe is part of Case International, and it has a global outreach in terms of development or advancement. I think that's a good word, advancement. And it is largely, of course, about higher education, and therefore you learn from difference. But I realized as I thought about how heads screw up development that I could have inserted the word vice-chancellor at almost every point. So I've grown up in development because of some very, very capable professionals and because of Case Europe. Why is development important? Well, it's important because it defines a school. It makes you decide who you are. It makes you decide what you want. It makes you have clarity. It provokes wonderful ethical debates. And if schools can't have those, then who can? I'm so pleased that you've got a session on ethics in philanthropy. Because schools are about ideas like that. And if we're not encouraging students to think about that, then we don't deserve to be called schools. So we should really, really want development in schools, because it's through development that we get our dreams. And this is our dream for Wells Cathedral School, that we want to give an inspiring education in a musically alive and beautiful environment as a brilliant foundation for life, because I'm interested in how our students are going to be in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, when they will be running my old people's home, and when I will no longer have any power or influence, and neither will their parents. Brilliant foundation for life. That's what schools are about. And the great thing about schools and development, ladies and gentlemen, is that schools have people for much longer, of course. Universities have them usually just for 3 or 4 years, but schools have them for much longer. Generally speaking, people owe a lot more to their schools, and if you get them to tell you the stories, you can discover why, and you can persuade them of that. So it's through development that we developed our dream as a school. And it was our then development director who built us a very classy, a kind of Rolls-Royce engine for development, that we gained our dream. Because he said to me, Elizabeth, there's no point in doing this unless you can tell me what this school is. You've got this wonderful motto, Esto Quod Es. I know what you do. I can see what the outcomes are. It's wonderful. It's been doing it for a very long time. But put it into words. What are we actually about? So we had to create our dream, and we wouldn't have done that if we hadn't realized that we needed development. So development gives a school its dream, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you are important, because you are the dream makers, and sometimes you're the dream catchers. And don't let anybody, like ahead, tell you differently. Development defines a school. So it's important. But why do able people who want it, able people like me who want it, get in its way? I'm just going to suggest a few ideas why that might happen, recognizing, of course, that most of you have heads who lead this beautifully and who don't screw up at all in your terms. Well, I've spent a lot of time since I was invited to do this, speaking to development professionals in both schools and in universities. And in schools I've said, how's your head? How's she doing? How's he doing? Usually that was a genuine inquiry after somebody's welfare. But inevitably, what I either got was, oh, he really gets it, or she still doesn't get it. And it was always those words. He gets it, she gets it, they don't get it, the governors don't get it. It began to sound like one of the five a day. You know, either you got it or you didn't get it. And when I pushed, it was really quite difficult to get people to explain what they meant by that. But obviously they knew what they meant by that. So I started to think, well, of course, one of the problems is that we're not quite sure what it's supposed to look like when it's done well. And one of your great strengths, ladies and gentlemen, is that you do give people like me data, and we love data. We like stories even more, actually. But we need the data to support the stories. You give us data, you do benchmarking, and you do all that really well, but it is still quite hard for you, beyond the targets and the capital development and the bursary funds and the alumni engagement, to tell us what it really looks like when it's done well. There's a story, you know, about a little girl who tongue between her lips and pencil clutched in her hand, was poring over a very detailed drawing she was doing. And her teacher, she was 6, the little girl, her teacher said to her, "What are you drawing?" And she said, "I'm drawing a picture of God." And the teacher said, "But no one knows what good God looks like." "Well, they soon will," she said. And that's the spirit, ladies and gentlemen, that development should engender. We're not quite sure what this is going to look like when we do it really well, but very soon you're going to see. Nobody knows what God looks like. Well, they soon will. And of course, one of the things that may be a factor for your head in screwing up development is because other people don't get it. Now, somebody once said that the heads of independent schools in the United Kingdom represented the last bastion of benevolent dictatorship. And I stand before you proud to be the heir of Catherine the Great. And there is some extent to which that is still true. However, we are still women and men under orders. And contrary to this myth that we are benevolent dictators and we only have to go like that, and they come and they go, we feel it's a very, very fragile world. 3 quite close friends just in our southwest area over the last 6 months have just disappeared from their schools. Now, they haven't been vaporized and they haven't been stabbed in the leg with an umbrella, but they've left their school. And they were all really, really capable people who had led their schools with distinction. But something had happened which meant that somebody felt that for one reason or another, and I'm not arguing with the decision, and I don't know enough about it anyway, it was time that they went. So we may look like benevolent dictators, but we increasingly feel that we live in quite a fragile world. And sometimes that might be why we screw up development. It may be, of course, that we have problems getting buy-in. We know we want it, and we sort of get it, but we have problems getting buy-in. So we've appointed you. Well, now what? Who really are the stakeholders for your heads? Are they parents? Are they staff? Are they governors? Are they alumni? Well, of course, for most of them, the chief stakeholders should be the students, and yet they're the ones from whom they will get buy-in for almost anything if it seems remotely fun, actually. So they won't have problems getting buy-in from students, but they may well feel that they're having problems getting buy-in for you, for paying your wages from some of the stakeholders. Believe it or not, they may be scared of offending people. Or they may, of course, have inherited a school which has a kind of old-fashioned London club attitude to fundraising. Now, I scarcely believe these places still exist, but certainly Wells Cathedral School was like that when I went. That there were some people who'd been very successful in development and particularly in fundraising for the school, but they'd done it in the old-fashioned way. And it was quite difficult to persuade them that nowadays we did need to professionalize it, but we also needed them on the team. So it may be that your head is struggling with a kind of development which actually doesn't quite work effectively on its own anymore. And of course, your head may be trying to do too much of it on his or her own. One of the reasons, I think, why sometimes we screw up fundraising is because we don't trust you. which is odd, isn't it, if we've appointed you? And yet, why wouldn't we trust you? Well, maybe there's something worrying us. We like to control things, us benevolent dictators. And by definition, we shouldn't be controlling you. So we employed you to do what you do well and to get better at it and to find out how to do that in the context of our culture and our school. But maybe we are trying to control you. Maybe there's something about the relationship. Maybe you're not doing it our way, but we don't know how to do it. Because we do like to control things as heads and as vice-chancellors. The great illusion, of course, and Eric once talked to me about this, is that in a school, you can pretend that you do control things. You don't, of course you don't. But you can pretend that you do, whereas vice-chancellors find it difficult to live with that illusion because the whole operation is so vast that they can't pretend that they can control it. They just have to know when to dive in and swim underwater a bit and pick up a few pebbles from the bottom, or when to stand up and pull some strings in the puppet theatre. But they can't kid themselves that they can control it. I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, that we as heads sometimes try to kid ourselves that we can control stuff. We can't, and the sooner you can build up a trusting relationship so that you can disabuse me of that, the better. But it may mean a slightly rocky start. Of course, sometimes heads think that they know better. And you do have to realize, ladies and gentlemen, that we are used to knowing better. And that sometimes some of the people who invest in our schools by sending their children to us think we should know better. Fortunately, parents at Wells Cathedral School have lost that illusion a very long time ago. They know I don't know better, which is an advantage of staying around. But sometimes heads do, and they're wrong, but they really do feel that they should know better. And it's a weird world, the world of a school, you know, because it's all about preparing the product to move on, to go. From the moment that a child comes into the nursery, you're thinking about when they go, where they go, what they do then. And that means it is a really, really weird world. There's a famous story about a headmaster of Ampleforth, then as now, a monk. And a woman, a rather austere woman, took her son, because it would have been her son in those days, to Ampleforth to look round and to meet the head. And she said, "Headmaster, for what do you prepare your boys?" And he said, "For death, madam, for death." It's a weird world, the world of school, because of course there is some truth in it. We are preparing our children brilliant foundation for life, but if we're a school worth its salt, we'll be helping them to think about the fact that life isn't everything that we live for. So it's a really weird world, the world of school, and it's very easy for heads to feel they know best about it. They don't, but maybe you can understand why we might think that. They may think that they have other priorities. Well, they do. Or they really, really, really think that they do. And you need to help them think about how and when to prioritize development. Eric, as Vice-Chancellor at Bristol, how much of your time did you spend on development as a proportion? 40 days a year. Did your development professionals think that was enough?
No.
They'd have liked you to do more. Do you think the university development, he didn't know I was going to do this, do you think the university development programme would have gone better if you had spent more than 40 days a year? Because you'd got the right people, and because your 40 days were quality days. It will always be an issue. You will always feel that we should have you as more of a priority. And we will always feel that there should be other priorities. So, you've heard Eric, 40 days a year, probably enough to do a good job, make sure they're quality days. And that means that they're quality days for the head as well as for the job that she or he is doing. It may be that your head is nervous of responsibility, of failure, of reputation, and so sometimes they will yield to the temptation of not doing anything at all. And that's a really bad thing for a school. Lots of schools are lovely and they have lovely traditions, and for goodness sake, I lead a school that's been around for over 1,000 years. But it's so easy for it to become a fossil, and fossils are very pretty, but they don't do a lot. And so nerves can sometimes be about anxiety, about screwing it up. It may, of course, just be insecure. Well, aren't we all? I have eminent colleagues in other schools, big, strapping blokes who admit to being physically sick, to vomiting the night before exam results are due, because they are insecure, nervous, worried about the reputation of their school. And we know that exams are only, what is it that Anthony Seldon says, about 25% of what schools do. And of course he's right, but it doesn't mean that if you think that's how you're being judged, you don't get nervous. So, they may be nervous. And what can you do about all that? Well, they did employ you. And by definition, ladies and gentlemen, you belong to the most empathetic profession in the world. You're open, you're flexible, you know how to talk to people, you know how to make people feel good about themselves. So you should be gold dust for your head. The very wise, very experienced, very close to retirement head of a well-known school who'd kind of created development there all on his own, sat on the Case Europe board before me, and he nominated me for the board. And one day I said to him, "Why are you so keen on it? Why do you love it so much?" And he said, "Because I've never been so kissed so many times by so many beautiful women across Europe. And my wife comes too." And you are those kind of people. You have much to offer in this fragile, fragile world. So, if you think your head is screwing up development, find out how to love her. Find out how to love him. It is your job, ladies and gentlemen. I didn't say like. I said love. And think about what that means. Find out how to love them. Because nobody else will if you don't, and you're good at it. Find out how to love them. Different things work differently for different people. But find out how to love them. Be useful. It's part of loving them, of course. Think about what they most need that may be nothing to do with you, you think, but you know everything is to do with you. You're about development and advancement of the school. It's all to do with you. It's more to do with you than it is to do with the head, almost. So find out how to be useful so that everyone sees that you're the girl who's prepared to volunteer to speak in chapel, who's prepared to volunteer to do duties, who's prepared to volunteer to share a passion or an interest, to start a wine society, to help with debating, to drive the minibus, to coach squash, whatever. Be useful. Don't live in the box of advancement or development. See what he or she thinks he or she most needs and find a way of providing it. Because you'll be able to, you're creative, flexible, open development professionals. You're about philanthropy. You know about loving human beings. And if you can love men and women, philanthropy, then you can certainly love your heads. Be so useful that you make yourself indispensable. You're the go-to person. There's something they're concerned about. They need an objective view on something. They want to run something past somebody who will at least hear them to the end of the sentence and not immediately say, but. Be that person. Be indispensable. Put your head round the door. Okay? You'll be the first person to have done that to them that day, unless they have pets. Be the person who will listen to them. Be the person who will help them persuade. We're introducing something new. You're good at persuasion. Tell me, how do I approach my common room about this? Very easy to say, well, it's nothing to do with me. But it is, because you've got those skills. So make sure that they are available to your head. You've got aspiration, it's what you do. You've got attitude, and you should have authenticity, otherwise you won't be very good at what you do. You'll know where the good stories are. Aspiration, attitude, authenticity, those 3 A's. It's what development professionals have. They need those things. So make sure that you give them to them. Make it fun. It's very easy for you to do that. You do cool stuff that means nice food and nice drink. Whatever kind of a budget you're doing it on. You're the guy who can take them out of school. You're the guy who can make them feel that they can do it, that they can talk, that they can tell the stories. You're the guy who can help them with people, introvert or extrovert, who can help them with people. You're the guy who can create some balance and humor. You've all got a sense of humor. Actually, I think sense of humor is probably a bit overrated. I think when we talk about sense of humor, we really mean a sense of balance. And be the person who introduces that for your head. And, of course, make them laugh. Think about their 90%, icebergs. I find myself talking about icebergs a lot at the moment. 10%, tiny bit above the surface. What's their 90%? What's actually going on in their 90%? Now, you'll never know it all. You wouldn't want to, ladies and gentlemen. But if you can at least find out something about some of that 90%, it will help you to understand the 10% that you and your job is getting and that you need. So find out about their 90%. Do remember that a lot of heads think that other people need to think that they are perfect. It's the old benevolent dictator thing again. It's not true. And it holds a lot of good leaders, I think, below the waterline, almost before they've started. And I made that error at Wells Cathedral School in my first couple of years. I thought people needed to see that I was calm and that I was in control. And I think they did. But it wasn't until my director of music, now a head, unsurprisingly, said to me, Elizabeth, just let them see that you're human. because you haven't let them see that yet. I know you are because you've let me see it. So help them to be human in the way you broker their relationships with other people, even their own colleagues. Get clarity. Isn't that what most of you want from your heads? Just give me clarity. Well, yes, of course, get it, because you won't do your job unless you're given it. And you can say that, and you can tell them I said so. They have to give you some clarity, and you have to help them get it. But you're the guys who give clarity as well. You're the guys who can create the dream for them. And sometimes the clarity isn't about the things that you can see. Sometimes it's about the spaces in between, like classical architecture, all designed around the spaces rather than the actual pillars. So help them get clarity. Give them clarity, because you can. Stick around. I sat next to somebody running alumni relations at a very major university, actually in another country, it was in Scotland, at a dinner a couple of weeks ago. And she was new. She'd come from another university. She was clearly very, very good. That's what her reputation was. And I said, how long are you going to be here? And she said, oh, well, I'm eager for opportunities anywhere. They are, of course. And I thought, ooh, I wonder if the person who employed you, who won't, of course, been the equivalent of the Vice-Chancellor, not called that in that university, but that's what it meant. I wonder what that person will really feel about that. Now, of course, you will all want to move on at some point. But at least give the impression of loyalty, please. Because you may have gone to X school because it was a job. Or it may have been convenient for you in terms of your family, or the salary, or the location. But do remember that for the head of almost every school, independent or maintained, probably in the world, the job is a love affair. And you need at least to be able to pretend that it is for you as well. Because people embroiled in a love affair want other people to understand their love affair. And if the professional whom they have employed to help them share that love doesn't seem to want to stick around, that's quite undermining. Now, it doesn't mean you have to stay forever, and I can't work that out, because heads don't stay forever anyway, and serial monogamy is absolutely one way of conducting your professional life. But at the time, it has to be a love affair. It's okay, when you go, they'll cope. But if you've done it right, when you say you need to go, they should be just a trifle upset. Because it will feel like somebody who's shared a love affair wants to break it off. Now, it's not like that at all, but that's how it will feel. When our first proper development director at Wells Cathedral School told me he was going to leave, I cried, because it had been a huge work to appoint him, and because he was doing really well. And the reason I reconciled myself to it was because it was about his own personal happiness and an opportunity on the other side of the world. And fortunately, they've stayed married. Otherwise, I would have been very angry, as far as I know. And what we lost was somebody who knew how to build a good engine. What we got in Mark Coote was somebody who knew about building engines, maintaining them, and being a racing driver. So I dried my tears quite quickly, but expect that kind of response, and don't feel that there's anything wrong with it. You've then got to transition your leader through what will seem to him or her to be something about breaking off a love affair. So remember that and try to stick around emotionally and try to show that it's a love affair for you as well. Be lucky. Oh, for goodness sake, woman, don't be so stupid. How can you possibly tell us to be lucky? Well, luck, they say, is where preparation meets opportunity. So you do the preparation, you're really good at that. Otherwise, you shouldn't be doing your jobs. And you're really, really good at creating opportunities. So you create luck on a daily basis. So be lucky and make sure that you're sharing the way in which you are preparing and creating opportunities. And finally, the fish tank. Some of you will know this story. I was talking to somebody yesterday who used to work in radio drama and who said, well, of course, the best visuals, Elizabeth, are the ones we create ourselves. That's why I've resisted the temptation to have any pictures at all, and it really was a temptation to have a picture here. Fish tank, huge glass fish tank. Here it is, lined up beside it. Large container of water. Large container of sand. Large container of pebbles. Round, small, polished, perfectly formed. Large container of rocks. Craggy, sharp, grey. Fish tank. Water, sand, pebbles, rocks. Get them all into the fish tank. Well, put in the water first, then follow it with the sand, then follow it with the pebbles, then follow it with the rocks, and what have you got? You've got a huge mess. And I once did this in the pulpit of Wells Cathedral. With visual aids. And if you want to see experienced, hard-bitten vergers pale, then you pretend that you're going to do this on the edge of the pulpit. But of course, if you put the rocks in first, and then you pour in the pebbles and you shake the tank around, and then you pour in the sand and you shake it around, you can then pour in all the water as well. And you need to be the people who will make sure that the rocks of development and advancement are some of the rocks that go in first. Because then you will also be able to be the people who pour in the water at the end. You will be able to be the people who make sure that there is always time for a drink at the end of the day. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.